Once the person has died, then the family will immediately try and make preparations for their ritual bath, which is known as a ghusl. Now this will be done at a special area which you can find within mosques or local burial committee. Once that's done, then the body will be wrapped in the special shroud, which is known as the coffin, which is a white cloth. We believe that we came to this world with nothing, so we should leave with nothing at all, and have a simplicity with us. So that's why we're covered in the shroud, because that's the most simplest piece of clothing you could find. That's why. Once the body's been wrapped, then the body is taken to the mosque or the area where the funeral prayers will happen. The funeral prayer, which is known as the janazah, will be read by the men in the mosque. The body will be then taken and then buried without a coffin. It's similar to Christian practice where you throw in the soil. Everyone will have a turn to throw the soil within the family over the deceased. Prayers will once be said, and then that's it, the deceased will be left. The mourning period is for 3 days, where the family would mourn for the death of the person. And then after 3 days, they're encouraged to start getting on with daily life. The reason for this is because within Islam we believe death is part of life, and we have to accept that. The only person who's allowed a longer mourning period would be the wife. If her husband has passed away, then she's allowed 4 months and 10 days of mourning, which will mean she can stay indoors. She will refrain from dressing up, etc., just to show that she's had a great loss in her life.
The funeral that impacted most of my life was the passing of my dad, which happened about 7 years ago. So that was, quite tough really, because there's specific rites, specific things you have to do, being the eldest son. But when you're at the mosque where you they do the prayers and so on, and they have the body in front of you, and the imam will say, this is after he's the eldest son, or they'll ask all the sons to stand up and say, we all vouch if this was a good man, and people say yes, we vouch. And they'll also say, well, if this man owed you any money, that's his son, so you go and get the money he owed from his son, this is his son. So that's it's a noble way to kind of end someone's life, and people come around and do prayers, and there was several hundred people.
I went to a Jewish cremation a few years ago, and this is unusual. In Judaism generally there's a belief in bodily resurrection, and so burial is the preferred means of interment of bodies. But some within progressive communities are following people in wider society and thinking about cremation as a more ecological form of interment of bodies. In terms of how the body is presented for burial, there is a tradition that people should be buried in a prayer shawl and buried without ceremony, so that there shouldn't be elaborate coffins or anything to show that person's wealth. And it's part of the Jewish community really to treat mourners as a special case, so that they are in many communities helped to come back to ordinary life, but kept apart for that period where they've got the pain of immediate bereavement, so that they were brought into the congregation, and people then knew that they'd been bereaved and were able to give them the traditional greeting or saying, which is to wish them a long life. And every year on the anniversary of somebody's death, you have a yahrzeit, an anniversary of the person's death, which is read out in the synagogue, and congregants will wish that person a long life. So in the face of death, as it were, affirm life. And many synagogues will have like a tree of remembrance, and so it's a way, perhaps for a migrant community where there may be burials in other countries, and particularly for the community in Britain where many lost family during the Holocaust and don't know where the graves are. It's a way of remembering people in a special place in the synagogue. pain that people have inwardly could be demonstrated externally, that people will either rip the collar of their suit or put a ribbon on and rip that just to show the pain they're feeling inside. For the first 7 days they sit Shiva, which is really to be separated and to do things that are different, so that they wouldn't wear leather, they would sit in low stools, they would cover mirrors, people would bring them food, so that it's really recognising that they're going through a period of trauma. And then the next month is spent in gradually returning to ordinary life. But for the whole of that year, with the death of a relative or a very close friend, they would say the Kaddish every day. So at the heart of Jewish remembrance is the Kaddish prayer. This features in every religious service. And it features specifically in remembering the art site, the anniversary of people's deaths, which ends with Oseh Shalom Bimramav Uyaseh Shalom Aleinu V'al Kol Israel V'al Kol B'nei Adam V'imru Amen. It'll be interesting to see in the future whether those ideas towards alternative forms of burial are taken. So the idea is that people come in to the world with nothing. And so, this saying, there are no pockets in a shroud, that they go out of the world essentially in the same state with nothing. I'm thinking of Jewish graveyards that I've been to in Europe. This idea of showing the loss is shown with the death of a child. But quite often either the gravestone itself or a kind of column which marks the grave would be broken to show that this wasn't a life that was fulfilled.
It's a very satisfactory job looking after families when they're at the time when they've obviously suffered a great loss. It's a good thing to be able to help someone at that time. You need to be able to take off that burden of them, and to be able to help the families and look at the requests and to deal with everything for them. My most vivid memory of Newman's is when we had to go and collect a cross for a nun's funeral, and I remember this cross, collecting it because I had to carry it. I remember it being so heavy, and it was silver, like a silver coloured metal. Very, very large, very decorative. Because I remember I hadn't seen anything like that before, and I remember that lots of people showing a lot of interest when we got back with it because it was an unusual item. Some religions have a simple coffin with no religious symbols, others would have crucifixes and some religious symbols. Some would have caskets, which would be more decorative, or higher end coffins which would be more decorative, and they would have specific religious ornaments that would be fitted, which really, requirements of the family and requirements of the religion.
I'm a member of the Baha'i faith and a member of Birmingham Baha'i community. They put a burial ring on the finger, which has got a Baha'i prayer on it, and the body is buried in a coffin, hopefully, or whatever might be the tradition of that country, but normally, I guess. For Baha'is, death is not a sad occasion. We are told that death has been given to us as sort of to return us back to God, which is what our soul yearns for, to be reunited with. When you pray for somebody's soul, that you're helping them progress through the spiritual realm, so that prayer is what's helping them progress in the next life as well, and that you can still share that connection with that person. They haven't truly left us. Love is eternal, as is the connection that you have with people, so you will always be close to them, and you'll be reunited with them in the next life as well. You must be buried within an hour's travelling distance of where the body, where the person has died. When somebody dies, that separation isn't for the soul. It has been in close communication with that body, and that body is precious and holy. The Baha'is believe in the unity of all religions, so that all religions come from the same one God.
Baha'u'llah tells us we must liken it to the embryo in a mother's womb. That the baby is in the womb, it's very close to this life, but it doesn't know that. And it's developing arms, legs, everything that it will need for this life. But these are likened to our spiritual qualities, which we must develop here, because when we move on to the next life, then it'll be a spiritual life, and we need spiritual qualities. So if we don't develop them here, when we move on, that it'll be as if we're missing an arm or have a weak leg, and we need, this is what this life is designed. It might be hard and struggles, but this develops us spiritually, and then we will be more prepared for our next life. Kindness and generosity and love, patience, all these things that we develop as we go through life, and they make us into a better person here, and obviously we're going to need them in the next life.
When someone passes away, the first tradition that we came across is that any clothes that they're dying, they are got rid of. We do not keep them, we burn them. Then the next stage is when a death is heard of, they go to the nearest and dearest, which is the head of the family, which was my father. A white sheet is laid on the floor in the house of the main room. People can pay their respects, and that would be done by wearing white as well, which is depiction of that there's a funeral. It's a symbolic tradition. People come to the house, and up until the funeral, that sheet is not lifted until the day of the funeral. When they wash the body, 24 hours prior to the funeral, they would actually have the body actually washed by the heads of the family. My mum being the head, being the mother, and all the other senior ladies. The girls are not allowed to actually wash the body because it's depicted as bad luck. And when you have actually washed the body, then fresh clothes are made, and then the lady, or my grandmother, was actually then laid to rest prior to the funeral, and the body is actually brought at home, and you're sending them on their final journey. Dates, almonds, and also other kind of, fresh fruits like sultanas in her coffin. You would then go to the temple, prayers will be said, and then we move on to the cremation, because we do not do burials. Simply because cremation is always meant to be that the soul actually has gone and then the body's released into the natural earth. I remember quite frankly when I did go and see my grandmother, when she did come to the house before we finally said goodbye, all the children and the great-grandchildren were around her, and we weren't allowed to cry because it would actually then mean that her body has been soiled with our own kind of, bad sins that we're carrying, because she's gone, she's pure. And I remember when we were saying goodbye to her, she said something to me. She said, make sure that you put socks on my feet. She said, if I die. She goes, because my feet get cold.
The last rites, that's before the funerary tradition, that's the first process of death in the Catholic tradition.
I suppose it's the last chance for the person to be with the priest, to cleanse their soul, to really not admit to doing anything wrong, but just to say, I'm ready. And that's really important. And they have the Eucharist or Holy Communion as well. That happened to Nanny, didn't it? But she was so calm about it.
Yeah, she was. Really, she seemed really settled.
We were really upset, but she was just
had a smile on her face. She was ready to make that
journey.
I think that can help people in the process to see the person laid out to rest. But I suppose in the Catholic tradition, the day before the funeral, the body's always received into church, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then there's always a mass.
That mass is when people come together and they just sit in church really and just say the rosary. So you can imagine like 40 people saying, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. I remember some people saying it was just this rhythm, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Constant rhythm. And it's quite comforting, I think, as well.
It's quite like pomp and ceremony in a way, isn't it? You've got the smells, the bells, and I don't know, it really feels like you are saying goodbye to the past. The Catholic faith, they like, if you are going to be cremated, they like you to bury the ashes. The wake afterwards, especially in Irish communities, that's always a bit of a, I don't want to say a party. Well, it is. It's a celebration, isn't it?
It's about giving them a good send-off.
I'm a Christian myself, but I'm going to be talking about my father's death, who was a Sikh, but also mixed into that is something about Hinduism as well. So it's a fusion of three different faiths really coming together at his death. Now, in my father's case, what actually happened was that when the funeral took place, I was given an opportunity to participate as a Christian and to read one of the well-known sort of scriptures, which is Psalm 23, and I read that in English, and then my brother-in-law read it in Punjabi, there was a Sikh priest who was leading the service, but so we had this fusion of Sikhism, Christianity, but a bit of Hinduism as well, because part of my sort of father's side were Hindus, the other side were Sikhs. So, and there were others who were Christians there as well from my family. So it's a fusion of all those three coming together, really. That normally happens, as I say, at the crematorium. Most of the services that take place. And the individual, the deceased, is cremated there and the ashes are taken. But they also, in the Sikh tradition, go back to they go then to the Gurdwara, the Sikh temple, and there's a service there. And at the end of that service, everybody's fed. It's normally a vegetarian meal, and the family, the immediate family, are very much involved in serving that. I think in this context, whereas in the West, we tend to see funerals as that individual and then the family and supporting that. In the Asian context, particularly in the Sikh and Hindu context, and I'm sure in the Muslim as well, it's seen more as a community coming together and grieving together.
Buddhists believe in karma and rebirth, and therefore what you have done in the previous lives will affect how you are reborn. If people know that they're dying or that their relatives are dying, they will ask the monks to come and chant so that the person can concentrate on thinking all the good things that they have done in their life and to concentrate on being aware at the moment of death. And if the person isn't able to think that for themselves, the people around them think of all the good things that that person has done in their life. And chant the one on dependent origination, which how you go through life from birth to death and you circle round again. So they'll most likely chant that as well. The Sri Lankans have this tradition of using a white thread, and at most of their services they tend to have a white thread, and everybody holds the white thread in their hands so that the whole of the community is combined. In Buddhist tradition, the 40th day after the death is auspicious. I'm not really sure why it's the 40th day, and this is only in the Theravadan tradition, and therefore very often the relatives will do good deeds on that day, and usually the good deeds are just providing a meal and invite relatives and the monks, and you provide a meal for these people, and by providing a meal you have done some good deeds and you will accrue merit. But what you do, instead of accruing the merit to yourself, you pass the merit to the deceased so that it will help with their rebirth.